Mhm.
Well, LD, how are you tonight?
My brother Kirk, man, good to see you, man. Good to see
It
you.
is good to see you. You know, last week, LD, we had a great conversation around what we are as friends, and that racism is real, that it does exist. That one of the first things that we need to do is acknowledge that racism and acknowledge that it exists, and understand that we're also going to agree to disagree on things. And so tonight, we decided to get together for a second week and just kind of keep talking about this issue of racism, acknowledgement, and LD, what do you want to talk about tonight to our friends, our families, and those who may be watching?
Kirk, man, first and foremost, I'm grateful for this privilege and opportunity for us to come together again, man. It's good to see you, brother. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I really appreciate all of them for tuning in that even wanted us to continue and wanted us to keep having these candid and crucial conversations that need to be
Yes.
had. And you mentioned something earlier and the key to that is being able to disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
And what I love is that, like you said, we both come from two different backgrounds. We're not going to agree on everything. You may like, I'm just making this up, you may like the Dallas Cowboys, I may like the Carolina Panthers.
There you go. There you go.
but we can disagree, we can agree to disagree, and then disagree without being disagreeable. And that's the key, and that's what society needs to understand. They got to have a heart. And then, as we talked about before, we talked about last week acknowledging. And I think that we're in the first stages of that right now, where people are actually acknowledging, you know what? Racism is real. This is an issue. This is a problem. This is something that has been occurring. So, yes, acknowledge it. And we're talking about this because people have asked the question, what can I do to help? As a matter of fact, Kirk, it's so ironic because today, during a staff meeting, there was some questions, things that was going on, and then I spoke to someone after the meeting that stated they really wanted to help. He's a Caucasian brother. He really wanted to help, but he did not want to be the great white hope.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
He didn't want that mantra. He didn't want that stigma. He didn't want it to seem like, hey, I'm just another white guy that's coming to try to help another black guy or the black population. I'm trying to be the great white hope and all of that. And so I told him, talked to him about a list of things that I feel that is needed in order to bring resolve, bring awareness, and those things to the situations that are going on. And we talked about last week acknowledging. We talked about acknowledging.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. Number one, that you got to admit that there is a problem. And once we get to the point of acknowledging that there is a problem, then the second thing, now this is LD chapter 2, verse 5, right? We have to admit that those things are happening. And I know people out there are going to say, LD, they're synonyms, right? They're synonyms. That's cool. If you want to call them synonyms, that's fine. And they are synonyms. But when you acknowledge something, you kind of accept the existence of it, right? You acknowledge, you
Yes.
accept the existence of it. And then when you admit something, then that's confession. You confess it to be true. You verbalize it, you see. So it's not enough just to acknowledge it, but we need our white brothers and sisters to admit it as well. Verbalize it, confess it to be so. Here's my example. Let's say, Kirk, that you and I go to an event and I go into the room and I see you over there and you see me and I give you one of them. You give me one of them. I just acknowledge your presence, right?
Right.
So then after the event is over, somebody says, hey, did you see Kirk Cox there? I ain't got to admit that I saw you.
Mm.
If I don't verbalize it, it don't mean that I'm admitting that I saw you there. You understand?
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to say is that in America and in cultures, in the Caucasian culture, whether my Caucasian, my white brothers and sisters, we need you to acknowledge that it's been happening, but we also need you to admit that it's been happening too. You understand? It's not, and we're not asking. I'm LD Richardson is not asking. Let me speak for LD. LD's not asking you to come to me and bow down and say, LD, I repent for the evil of my ancestors. You know what I mean? I appreciate it. And that's a very nice gesture. I appreciate that. But your ancestors did what they're doing. People are doing what they're doing today. So I need you to admit what's happening today. And so I think that's very, very, very important.
That's good. So LD, we also talked about last week that within each culture, within each location, within each city, state, community, there are different levels of racism that exist. It's not going to be the same in each city. It's not going to be the same in each county. It's not going to be the same in each region, city, state, and across the nation. So I think it's important for people to kind of understand within their own local community. Then let's just take, I live in Lincoln, you live in the Omaha area, and they're two different cities. There may be some of the same levels of racism or some of the same issues that are going on. I know that each city is definitely acknowledging at a local level that there are issues. And I know that you've even been approached by the community to talk about some of those things. So what would you say, at least in our community, and just as a basis, what are some of those things that we as a community and as communities can start to admit? What are those starting places of admittance? What are those important issues, those candid conversations that need to happen? What are the major issues, or what are the most important that we can start to talk about, have conversations about with family, with friends, and come together and try to work cohesively together as a team to tackle and bring about the change that's needed?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kirk. Great question. And I feel personally, again, from LD chapter 2, verse 5, I feel that we have to admit the bottom line. As Stone Cold Steve Austin says, that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. Stone Cold, I need some money off that promotion. But the thing about it is that we have to admit the things that are happening, the reality of what's happening. We have to admit, and we're talking about racism. We're talking about inequality. We're talking about an unlevel playing field that has been for many years. We're talking about the degradation of one race. We're talking about those things like that. Those are the things that have to be admitted. We have to admit and have to acknowledge, instead of just looking over the fence and saying, oh, I see it. Oh, I see it. It's been happening. It's time to tear those fences down. Or it's time for people to climb the fence and then get involved and admit those things are happening, but admit that those things are wrong. That's what we need. We need a bottom line, and we need congruency to admit these things are wrong, and that is unfair, and that is not right. And that's what we need to admit.
So what would you say are the things that for you personally, for your family, that you see are unfair, that are unequal, that you've even experienced in your own life? You talked last week, it was just great for you to share some stories about growing up in Duncan, Oklahoma, brought back some memories for both of us. You talked about what your grandmother had faced. You talked about how you had gone to work with her and wondered why she always had to go through the back door. You talked about being at a diner there, and the owner saying, well, I can serve I can serve you, but I can't serve her. And so we know that those issues definitely existed at the time that you were growing up. And could you share even a little bit more today, even within your own local community, of things that you see, that you still experience, that we need to be admitting, that we need to be acknowledging, and then we need to be coming together and actually just having candid conversations about, being bold enough, being courageous enough to just put it all out there on the table and say, you know what, we're going to talk.
Right. And that's important. The importance of these candid and crucial conversations, Kurt, is the fact that we have to accept. I have to accept it. You have to accept it. Blacks have to accept it. Whites have to accept it. African Americans have to accept it. Caucasians have to accept it. These conversations are going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be uncomfortable. And that's something we have to accept and we have to grasp. So what America needs to do, and what we need to do as society, is we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable for a while. We got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Nobody likes being uncomfortable, man. Nobody. When babies are uncomfortable, they cry. You know, when we're uncomfortable, we shift. If we're too hot, we take off clothes. If we're too cold, we put on clothes. Nobody likes to be uncomfortable. If you're sitting in an uncomfortable position, we shift and we move. But in order for these conversations to take place and for them to be effective, both sides have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'll give you an example and then I'll ask you a question. I'll give you an example. Today I was on a call and then this topic was brought up. Racism, racial profiling, prejudice, hatred, bigotry, all of those things were brought up. So in somebody's conversation, they said the word Sambo. Well, in my history, in my culture, that word's, and I'm gonna talk for LD, that word Sambo, I twitched one time. And the person was not meaning it in a negative way. They were not saying anything bad. They weren't saying anything like that. They were just giving an example and they used that terminology in what they were talking about. Well, Sambo is a negative term in my book. See? And Sambo was one of those terms that was used a long time ago, you know, by racist people and things like that. It's a derogatory term. And they call us Sambo and all that type of stuff. You're supposed to go dance and, you know, you put on the paint and the big lip, white lip and all of that and all that, you know, those black faces with the whites around and all that type of stuff. They call you Sambo. And so when that person said it, because of the history, I twitched a little bit. Somebody else mentioned that their little child said, "What is a black person?" And I twitched a little bit because it's an uncomfortable conversation. You see what I mean? Now, the child was not asking, what is a black person, in a negative manner. The child was asking because the child was never taught to see color. The child was never taught that. So if they didn't understand what is black, what is white, they understand it on paper and in Crayola colors, but they didn't understand it because they were not taught racism. They were not taught prejudice. They were not taught any of those things. So that young person said, what is a black person? But because I am on edge as a black man, when I heard what is a black person, I twitched. Do you understand what I'm saying? So what we have to do as a race of people, and two different races of people, is we have to put down these shields that we have in front of us. I was having a conversation today and someone said, I don't like when people say, I'm not a racist. And this was a Caucasian brother. He said, I don't like when people say, I'm not a racist. When you say I'm not a racist, you're just putting up a shield and saying, I really don't want to hear anything else you have to say. I'm not a racist. I got black friends. I'm not a racist. You know, I play basketball with black people. Well, as soon as you do that, you're putting up that guard and that shield. Now, everybody has that guard and that shield. I have that guard and that shield because when I hear certain terms, it triggers me and it makes me want to regress to that old LD, that we don't want to come out. But it triggers me. And what we both have to do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, both races of people, both different creeds, colors, whatever, all people. We got to get comfortable being uncomfortable when it comes to these decisions or these discussions, rather, that we have to have. Racial profiling, systemic racism, the proportion of black people killed by police officers than white people's numbers versus other brown and black people's numbers versus white people's numbers. We gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable talking about those things, or else we just gonna all have these guards up. And the first time that I say something that tweaks you or triggers you, I'm not talking about you, Kirk, you know what I mean? I'm talking in general as people. Then what we do is we put those guards up. Once those guards up, then we're not going to hear anything else. So it's very important that we got to understand these conversations are going to be uncomfortable. In my own experiences in life, did I ever face any racism and prejudice in Duncan, Oklahoma? I sure did. Has my family ever faced any? They sure have. Even back in the day when my brother used to come home from college, just because he drove a decent vehicle and a nice car, some of the police in Duncan would harass him whenever he would come to town. And those things would happen. My brother also was racially profiled, I believe in downtown Oklahoma City and Bricktown. He had went out with his friends, they was hanging out and all of that stuff. And then the police came up and racially profiled him, acted as if he was a suspect in something that was going on. They took my brother, they put him on the ground, they choked my brother. They crushed, it's just called the larynx, right? They mashed his larynx, and I believe they crushed it if I remember right. My brother had nothing to do with any crime that was happening at that time. I'll tell you how I know. Because my brother is more scared of my mama than he is of the police, than he is of the government. Likewise, I am too. So there are some things that we just don't do because we're scared of our mother. Now that's a whole nother discussion, Kirk, that we need to have when it talks about respecting parents and guardians and, that healthy fear.
Yes.
I'm not talking about this new fear that society in America keeps telling parents and guardians and kids that they shouldn't have. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that healthy fear of your parents and guardians that helps keep you on that right path. Even though we get off, we get off sometime, but there's a respect level and a healthy fear. That healthy fear is nothing more than a high regard and high respect. And so, but my point is, my brother had nothing to do with that. He had alibi. He had all of those things. Didn't even need an alibi because he was downtown eating with his friends. But they came and they abused him. They abused my brother. Put him on the ground, put a chokehold, took the billy club, choked him, and did all of that type of stuff. Made him go to jail, put him on bond, and all those things. It's being unfair. Yeah, it's being unfair. When I was growing up, Kirk, down there in Duncan, we used to go fishing at Clear Creek Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the way to Clear Creek, man, there would be some plums and peach trees on the side of the road. And some of them were on a fence. So we would get out, and my grandmother, man, I'm telling you, brother, Kirk, I probably would cut off my arms and legs to have one jar of my grandmother's plum jelly. My God, what a day. Man, you talking about the best jelly in the world. And she taught me how to make it, but I forgot how to do it. But we would stop, man, and we would get plums and we would get peaches and we would pick berries and we would do things like that. Because you got to understand, it's not that we were rich, And so anytime we had fresh fruit or things we can get off a tree and all of that type of stuff, we would get it and bring it home and then use it. And so we would go out fishing to Clear Creek and Lake Humphrey and all of those places. And we would stop on the side of the road and get some peaches or plums or things like that, or we'll see a tree and we'll pull over to do it. And many times when we would go, We would get called niggers. We
Hmm.
would get called spooks, coons, get off our property. Now this is a fence line. It's on public property over here, but because your fence is close by, you're trying to say we on your property. One time we was out getting peaches, and the kid come out and said, "Ma, ma, niggers stealing peaches. Niggers are stealing peaches." He had a country drawl, a country slang. And so we've been through all of that, Kirk, and there's much more, that we've been through dealing with unfairness because we're black, profiling. You go into stores, man, and then you're followed around like you're going to steal something. And I got money in my pocket. You followed around, and you have to watch how you act and watch how you walk. And these are things that some races and cultures have never had to deal with.
Right.
So what they need to do is sit down and talk to people and become empathetic and not just be sympathetic and enter into their shoes and try to identify, well, you know what? I've never had to experience that ever. I mean, let me ask you, Kirk, have you ever had to worry about that or experience that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. You go into a store and you got to make sure your hands are out of your pockets. You got to walk in and you got to make sure you don't make too much noise. You got to make sure you don't bring too much attention to yourself. These are things that we had to do as young black men, even growing up in our hometown of Duncan, Oklahoma. You know, and it's unfair. It's unfair, and people that have not experienced those things should talk to us so they can understand why people are upset, why people are saying they're tired of this, why people are saying it's time for change, why people are saying these things are happening. These things have happened. Yeah.
LD, I got to tell you, the more that you and I uh, continue in our conversations and conversations that we never had growing up throughout whenever we knew each other as teenagers at all. And now that, we're in our 40s and finally having these conversations and stuff that, you know, I never even knew before,
Right.
and so when I hear you talk about this, I got to tell you that it hurts. It does. It makes me sad to know that you have experienced those things in your life, and we have to not only, like you said, acknowledge that what you're telling is the truth, but also admit openly that those things did happen within the community that we both grew up in, and possibly are even still happening today. And we know because of what's going on in our society across the nation and what we've seen, we do know um, that those things do still exist, and people are speaking out. They're starting to talk about them more and more. And I think it's really, really important for, like we talked about last time, we are not here to talk to rebut at all. It's not a discussion of, well, this is what you believe, this is what I believe. This is
Right.
this is
Right.
this is discussion. It's real talk, and real talk is first listening and hearing in order to understand, in order to gain a perspective, like you said, not only of sympathy, but then try to move it into empathy. And it's really, really hard. You talked a lot about that last week, and it was just great to understand the difference between sympathy and empathy, and for us to try to, put ourselves in your shoes and say, well, what if that were me? Or have those things ever happen to me, and ask ourselves those hard questions. And then, as we then start to live our lives, to look for those things in the communities in which that we live. So next time that I go to the store, are my eyes open to even look for it, right? Am I looking for those types of things? Or if I come across a situation if I were to ever come across a situation between the police and someone that I feel is being handled in a very, very incorrect manner, what would I do? You got to ask yourself those hard questions, and start to put yourself in those places, because it's reality. And LD, I did some research this week on my own, something that I had never researched, something that I was never taught in grade school, junior high, high school, or college, to my knowledge. In all my education years,
Yes, sir.
I had never been taught, why were police departments actually established in the first place? Right? All right, LD, let's get real.
I like that. That's good
And
talk.
so
Yeah.
I started to research that this week. And the truth is, from some of the history, now, not for all reasons, not every police department was started because of this, but a lot in the South. A lot of police departments were established in the South in order to regulate the slaves whenever slavery existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, after the Emancipation Proclamation happened and the slaves were set free, the police departments were even heightened because they did not know how society was going to respond. And so the police departments, actually, some of them have their actual existence and beginning for the purpose of overseeing the African American or the Black community. And if that's where it got its start, for a lot of them, we still haven't grown out of that today. And in some of the articles that I actually read and got myself educated on, in some departments, we're actually only 50 years away, roughly 50 to 60 years away, from them being even trained for another purpose of just generally looking after the community. So we're not even 100 years away,
Yes.
right? We're not even 100 years away for the police departments actually being for the purpose of something other than overseeing either slaves or freed slaves once they were freed, and the African American and the integration of the African American Black community into society with the integration of whites. We talked a little bit about that last week, as we talked about, the Jim Crows and then the integration of schools. I mean, we're just talking about 1954 when the integration of schools happened. And so, I mean, again, this conversation is so, while it may seem old, in the history of things, it is so, in the history of time, it is so fresh and it is so new. And so it opened my eyes, LD, to a whole new world this week that I had honestly never even knew existed. And I had to ask myself the question, well, if that's the reason why a lot of the police departments were established in local communities, well, my goodness, why should we question whether it exists or whether it doesn't? I mean, if that's where it's got its start, we've got to admit that. We've got to acknowledge that. And, I was never taught that growing up.
Right.
I don't know if you were ever taught that growing up, but it's definitely not taught in the school system. It's definitely, but once I gained that knowledge of the history or the context and the foundation of why something was established, it opened my eyes to say, well, my goodness, there's no reason why the African American or the Black community shouldn't feel like that they are overseen or they're looked at more upon, or they feel like there's more aggression, because I mean, that's why those establishments were started in the first place. So we've got to start to admit those things. I think we've got to teach those to our kids, and teach the real history behind things, and get it out on the table and talk about is law enforcement wrong in and of itself? Would we say that law enforcement in and of itself is, right or wrong, or a good thing or a bad thing? Some people even today would disagree on that, right?
They would. Some
Is
would.
is law enforcement needed? Yes or no? But I think we can all agree that racial profiling, and that racial profiling is absolutely wrong. Is law enforcement wrong? In my opinion, what I believe, no, I don't believe that law enforcement is wrong.
Right.
I believe that law enforcement helps the community, but when law enforcement acts in an incorrect way, or when law enforcement does their job wrong towards, whether it be towards black people or whether it be towards white people, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Whether if they do their job wrong towards any human being, there's injustice involved. And we definitely see that. So then if we admit that, we acknowledge and we admit that there's injustice, then how do we then go about correcting that injustice that needs to be corrected?
I agree. And I agree with you, Kirk. I'm really glad you said what you said a minute ago about being taught and what you studied and what you researched, because that is the key. And that's part of the steps that I have that needs to occur with the Caucasian population, with my white brothers and sisters. We need, when I say we, I'm just talking about we, and even I need to educate myself on some things as well, because I didn't know that about the cops. I didn't know about the police department. I didn't know that that's how it was originally created and the foundation. I will say this: everything that is built upon a foundation. Nothing operates without a foundation. And if your foundation is rooted in, I'm saying this, racism, prejudice, bias, and all of that, think how many years, and even though there's not many years, as you mentioned, that we're away from some of these things. It's not many years that we're away from Jim Crow. It's not many years we're away from some of those things that happen, the integration of schools and all of those things. It's not many years away from when dogs was sicked on people. It's not, we're not many years away from my daddy, my grandmother, my mother, when they was growing up and all of that. Kirk, if they were walking down the streets of Main Street in Duncan, Oklahoma, and a white man or a white woman walked by them, they had to cross the other side. What makes, I'm saying this in these terms, I'm not talking about you, but what makes a person, or I'm going to say it like I want to say it, what makes you so special that another race of people have to put their head down? They can't look at you in the eye. They have to put their head down and go to the other side or move out of the way and make room for you to walk down the sidewalk like you are the king or the queen of the world. What makes you so special? What makes your race of people so eloquent that that's what everybody else has to bow down to do? Those are things that have had to happen. So we're not, as you mentioned, we're not very many years past those type of things. Dogs being sicked on people. People hung on a tree for sport, Kurt, for sport. So we need people to get into the history books. Go look at some of those pictures. Go look at the pictures of the black men hanging on a tree, nooses on their neck, and you got white men and kids around them taking pictures with their shotgun, smiling, and all of those things. March, water hoses, Bull Connor down in Alabama, storing the water hoses and the water fountains, not fountains, but the water hoses and the water trucks, spraying black people with water hoses, being beat because of the color of your skin, being mistreated because of the color of your skin, Ku Klux Klan and all of those type of things. These things are real, part of American history that was not taught in American history classes at Duncan Junior High and Duncan High, and is not taught in the classes here in Omaha, Nebraska, in Lincoln. It's not taught in the classes. I did not know that a black man created peanut butter. I didn't know that till I got
I
older.
didn't know. I didn't either.
Yeah, if I'm correct, I think was it George Washington Carver? I think I'm not sure. I can't remember. I'm getting older now, man. You know, but I didn't know those type of things back in my day. But I don't think no was it George Washington Carver? I can't remember who it was, but I thought it was a black man that created peanut butter back in the day. Um, Not that he created peanut butter, but he made many different uses for the peanut. I'm gonna put it like that because I don't think he created peanut butter. I got to do some more research on that, right? You see, but that's what I'm saying. We got to educate ourselves. We got to do some more research. But I know that he made many uses for the peanut. Who was one of the first people that did things with plasma and blood and all of that? It was a black man. I believe his name was Charles Drew. Hence the Charles Drew Clinic down the street in Omaha, Nebraska. But those things were never taught, you know? So people need to educate themselves. They need to acknowledge, but also admit, and then also admit that you don't know. It's okay to admit, I don't know. I didn't know. It's okay. And we got to be okay with saying, hey, I didn't know that. Just like I said just now, there's some research I need to do on some black historical figures. I need to do some more research because those things were never taught, you know. So we don't want to misspeak, but at the same time, you also got to do your research. You also got to find out those things and you got to acknowledge those things, but you got to learn. How do you learn? You learn and go get the history books. You learn and sit down and talk with the person of your opposite race, your brothers and sisters of the opposite race, just like Kirk and I are doing. Sit down, talk, hear the stories, hear the things that happen. Kirk, have you ever had to worry about your children, or have you taught your children? And have you ever had to think about? I got to teach my children that from an early age. I got to teach them what to do when they get stopped by the police. Most people are not thinking about that when they're rearing children. That's not on their mind. But in my culture, we have to teach that. I'm saying from birth all the way up, especially through the teenage years, even as they get grown. We have to teach this is what you have to do. Part of your survival skills. We've had to survive for years. And part of those survival techniques is you got to know what to do when you're stopped by police. I should be telling my son, this is what you do. This is how you stiff arm somebody. You know, this is how you save money. This is how you pop somebody when they come across your way in football. This is how you run the form and track. This is how I should be teaching them these things, pointing to him. And I do. But I should not have to worry about, hey, son, if you get stopped by the police, these are the things that you got to do. And guess what happened, Kirk? I get a call the other day when my son had told me that him and his friends went out to get some snacks and they got stopped by the police riding bikes. And he's the only black guy with all white guys. He's the only black dude that's there. In my mindset, here's a big target on you already. You're the only black dude that's there, number one. Number two, you're only 15, but you 6'1", 215 pounds of muscle. And you're a big boy. So when he told me that, Dad, we got stopped by the police, Kirk, I would like to take a poll to America and ask them, how many white Americans, sons and daughters call you and say, Mom, Dad, I got stopped by the police the other night. How many of your stomachs do like mine? Because this is what my stomach did. It knotted up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my stomach did when my son told me he got stopped by the police, because my first thought is he's the only black dude in the midst of all of those people. He's the only black guy that's there. He's going to be a target. They're going to think if anything happened, he's going to be the first one they blame, because these are things that I've had to deal with, and these things that are real. Even in Duncan, Kirk, something happened in the store, Woolsworth or whatever. Something happened, and I'm there, and there's some other kids there. It's the black kids who always got looked at first, always. My daughter, when she was young, went to, I can't think of the name, where they sell a bunch of earrings, little kid earrings, stuff, whatever. She was in middle school, and her and her friends went to this store to get some earrings and all that type of stuff. And guess what? They said somebody stole something. Well, who did the security guard detain? Who did the security guard blame for stealing? My daughter, because she was the only black girl in the midst of all of the white girls. And as I said earlier about my brother when I was making that joke, that's reality for my biological children. They're more scared of me than they are the police. They're more scared of me than they are of the government and all these other people, because they know what I've taught them and trained them, and they know certain things they should not do because they would have to answer to me. And my daughter knows not to steal. Now, kids do things all the time, Kirk. I stole my day. You know what I mean? I've done some things. Kids do things. I get that. But I know she didn't steal that day. But yet and still, she was profiled because she was the only black kid there. And until we admit these things are happening, until we admit that these things are going on, until we acknowledge it and admit it, then we just wasting up good breath in America.
Oh, LD, we didn't know where this conversation was going to go at all.
Yes, sir.
We just started talking and just started sharing. And I really appreciate you just sharing your heart, sharing personal stories, making yourself vulnerable. And I would just encourage us all, maybe this week, to take some time to make a list of what we acknowledge about racism and what we can admit about racism, and take some time to self-reflect, to get real with ourselves. Maybe do some research on your own about different police departments. I would also encourage you, I actually did some research that blew me away, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit next time that we meet, LD, but if you look at segregation and integration, and you look at proms, and you look at the segregation or integration of actual proms, I think you would be surprised to find out in the South, throughout Mississippi, throughout Georgia, it probably wasn't until the last actually 10 to 15 years where there was actually full integration, and where judges actually had to step in. And even though we've had it since 1954, there were still segregated schools in Mississippi, and definitely segregated proms where the black and the white community, or the Caucasian African American community, or whatever you want to say that it is, were not allowed to either go to school together or even have proms together. And so it's real. The level of the realness, like we said, is going to be different in different communities. There are communities that are better than others. That's just a fact based on where you live. But hopefully this week you can take some time as we learn and grow together, where you can take some time to just get by yourself, reflect, ask yourself the hard question of, what do I need to acknowledge? What do I need to admit in my own life, in my own sphere of influence, and in my community? And am I actually looking for those things as I'm out and around? And as I see them, what do I need to learn, and what do I need to do to get involved and respond? So LD, again, appreciate this time that we've had.
Always.
And
always.
Look forward to our next conversation. And until that time, I look forward to actually hopefully get to see you tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
In Omaha.
Yes, sir.
And until the next time, I pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you and to lift you up in prayer and hold you up. And man, again, just thank you for the time.
Thank you, my brother. And as Kirk mentioned last week, if you want to be a part of this conversation, if you have some questions that you would like to ask or things like that, or even Kirk, I would even mind some of our old buddies from Duncan wanted to get on and chat a little bit and share some.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
I'd love that as well. But please make sure that you message myself or Kirk and let us know that you have a question that you would like for us to cover or something like that. You let us know. But again, this is positivity. This is not negativity. So we're not tolerating any kind of negative talks or negative comments or anything like that. We're here, as Kirk said, to listen for understanding. We're not here listening to respond. We're here to listen for understanding on both sides of the street.
All right, LD, love you. And until next time, stay safe and be good.
All right, my brother. Thank you, man. Appreciate you,
Talk
Kirk.
to you later.
Take care, brother.
Bye-bye.